This video is going to talk about making edits to any of the apps that aren't just the typical edit form that you should be familiar with by now. So for this example, we're looking at the internships app for the College of FHSS, and this button over here takes us to the edit screen. A quick note is that for some of these apps, I've got variables being passed through with that navigate function. So the one I want to make note of right now is page mode is edit for that edit button over here, but alternatively, page mode is new for this plus sign. So we're going to be working with an edit form right now, and this is what it looks like. So each of these different tabs is its own edit form, including this header up here and the title up there. So that means that I can't use that typical submit form procedure that we use for other edit apps. What I've done, and I'll explain all this up here in just a minute, is primarily in these functions right here. So I've got an if statement where if the page mode is new or is not new for this one in particular, then we're going to run through this, but then that statement ends there. If it is new, we'll run through this. So for the edit mode, I've got a patch function for each different table, and over here, well, the lookup identifies which row we're editing, and over here holds which form updates we'll be patching through to that particular row within that table, because not each of these tabs represents its own individual table. And then down here is the exact same thing for when it is new, but in order to create these new rows, we've got defaults running into each table instead of looking up that specific row that we're editing. So up here at the very top, to explain this bit, in the General Info tab, we've got checkboxes for different fields. And that's a little harder to patch updates into just because each of these checkboxes is its own separate control instead of working as a whole. So what we've got going is in this submit button over here, I'm creating collections with the name of each of the checkboxes into one collection depending on its value. So if it has been checked, it'll go into the collection. And then on the field itself, on the update tab, I am concatenating that whole collection with spaces separating everything so it actually fits into that one field in the one row, which is how it's currently stored in the database. And obviously this is going to change depending on which database you're using, but if the words just put next to each other in the field is how the database you're working with goes, I'd recommend using this way. So just to go over that again, creating a collection based on the values of the checkboxes, and then in the update field of the field itself, concatenating all of that into one. And so for these big gross chunks of code over here, the focuses for this particular database, are just one table in and of itself, where each of these gets its own row, and each of these gets its own column, and each of the internships gets its own row, and it'll just say yes in that particular column if it should be checked for that. And so that required some fancy maneuvering in order to make sure we can update those correctly. So I've just got those patched individually up here based on whether or not they've been clicked. So for example, on this top one over here, when you check it, I'm updating this variable I created to now true. When you uncheck it, I update it to now false. But if you don't touch it, then that variable itself is empty. So if it's not empty and it's now true, we're patching it to that specific location with a yes. If it is not empty but it does not say now true, so it says now false, we're patching it with a blank. So that explains all of those. And we have so much of that because this is for the edit tables. And this one down here is for when you're creating new information with the new internship. So the only other thing of note in editing these is this placement table I've got, which is formatted differently where it's not a form, it's in the form of a data table. You probably won't run into this very often, but just so you know what to do if you do, instead of, well, if you're creating a brand new internship, you won't be able to add new information to this placement until after that's been created, so you have rows to edit in the table itself just because the formatting is so different. So over here, when you already have that internship taking up space in the placement table, I've just got this information down here where people can put in a new student who's been placed into that internship before, and then this add button over here collects it and patches it all in together. And then down here, I've just got a remove statement. Oh, I've got a variable that deletes that. But that's the only one that looks differently, and so everything else should make sense at this point.